You know, it's been a long time since we've seen Wolverine. I mean, even if you count his cameo in X-Men First Class, it's been a while since we've had an X-Men movie. Now, with the various legalities surrounding the movie rights still belonging to Fox, and fans themselves being divided about whether or not they should stay with Fox or have the rights revert back to Marvel, Fox is really itching for a win here with the Wolverine, especially if they want to generate enough hype to bolster the box office numbers for Days of Future Past. So how does this film hold up? Well, let's find out as we begin this episode of Romney's Reviews. Going into this film, it was kind of all up in the air for me. I mean, I followed the X-Men movies throughout my childhood and was equally infuriated and disappointed with the ending of X-Men Origins Wolverine. And given that they kind of squandered the reboot potential of X-Men First Class, I wasn't entirely sure how to feel about this film. What I can tell you with a great degree of certainty is that this film is a lot better than X-Men Origins Wolverine. However, it's not without its flaws. The first major issue is that the beginning is a tad slow, as they both have to establish the past with Logan saving a soldier at Nagasaki, as well as having to establish that the events of X3 are still canon. It's been a long time since X3 came out, and so that's a lot of information that the audience is expected to know, and thus, as such, the film feels kind of slow at the beginning as a result. The second problem I had was with the 3D that the film had, because in addition to being slow, the beginning is also dark. I don't mean like dark where it's like dark and brooding, but literally dark. Most of it is nighttime shots. And, well, let's just say, although they've fixed it, 3D viewing still tends to make the images a little bit darker. And when you have a night scene in a 3D movie, it only gets worse. As such, some of the shots at the beginning are not very conducive to a 3D experience. And it's not helped by the fact that some of the action sequences also feature some very shaky shots, which make the 3D viewing, well, a tad worse. They make it kind of unbearable and not really easy to enjoy because it gave me a headache. And just looking at the shots and the way the entire film was shot, it kind of shows that they didn't really plan the shots with 3D in mind. I mean, some people say, oh yeah, they planned certain shots with 3D in mind. Not quite, not in my opinion. They may have planned some of the more scenic shots with 3D in mind, but not so much the shots between the characters, particularly the action scenes. They didn't really have that much to them that felt like they were planned for a 3D viewing. It even says in the credits that it was a post-production conversion. Now, to properly talk about the third problem that I had with the film, it would require me to give a lot of information about the film that would seem kind of, well, spoilerific. So once again, here's the spoiler alert rant annotation. By clicking this, you're essentially releasing me from all liability from ruining your viewing experience because, well, it contains spoilers. So only click if you either A, have seen the film, or B, don't care about being spoiled. For those of you who haven't clicked the annotation, which it just went away, let me just say that there's a glaring continuity error in a scene in the film. Now, while most of that stuff would probably fly under the radar, it's just the case of the poor timing of said error that makes it really noticeable, at least to me. If you're a film student and you're watching the film, you'll know it when you see it. You will not be able to ignore it. Now, one thing that I can definitely say the film did right is that it didn't try to shoehorn in a lot of other mutant characters in order to appeal to the fanboys, because that was the big mistake that X-Men Origins Wolverine did. X-Men First Class did this in a better way because they were trying to essentially focus more on the team as opposed to an individual character. But with this film, given that it's called The Wolverine, they kept the focus on Wolverine. And so it felt really good to not try to essentially see, well, beloved characters like Gambit or Deadpool ruined. However, I did notice that they essentially tried to recreate sort of the father figure dynamic that Logan tends to have with certain female characters throughout the films. I mean, in the first X-Men movie, he kind of had that father figure situation with Rogue. In the comics, he's kind of seen as the father figure to Jubilee. And they kind of tried to establish that same sort of thing in this film, which was kind of but it could have been a lot worse. Flaws aside, I really found myself enjoying this film. It has good action, good character development, and, well, better writing than some of the X-Men films that preceded it. Although it did go dangerously close to having a very infuriating ending like X-Men Origins Wolverine. I mean, listening to some of the fanboy reactions behind me in the theater, I could tell that there were some things that they weren't really happy with, and had the film ended there at those certain points, well, it probably would have ruined the whole experience for everybody. But at least they stayed in continuity with the previous events of the film and actually tried to stay consistent, which nets them some points, and they at least had the sense to actually end it on a note that was, well, stronger. Not to mention that they also have a really nice sequel hook for Days of Future Past during the end credits, because they're taking a page from Marvel Studios and actually having key scenes happen, well, during the end credits. And not just the case of you see Wolverine eating shawarma in a demolished shop, but something that actually conveys actual details and sets things up for the next film. While I don't recommend seeing this film in 3D because of the dark and shaky imagery, I do recommend seeing this film in theaters if you're a fan of the X-Men. However, you may want to brush up on the events of the previous films prior to doing so, as there is a lot of information that the audience is expected to know and understand before going into this film. It's not necessarily friendly to those who haven't seen the previous films. All of that said, I'm giving The Wolverine a 3.5 out of 5. So that's it for this week's episode of Romney's Reviews. Since the paper's officially ended its run for the summer, I'm going to be taking the next week off to get caught up on schoolwork. Unless I get into an advanced screening during the next week, well, there won't be a video next week unless I get into an advanced screening. But the following week, I'll be taking a look at Alicia. See you then. I know it's been a while since I've done like a post-credits thingy, but the thing I was holding here is a comic that I actually had signed by Chris Claremont. I got to meet him at an event that was being held by Night Flight Comics back when they had a store at the City Library, and they brought in Chris Claremont. He gave kind of a Q&A / lecture thing about his process and writing for Marvel and kind of what it's like writing for comics, especially at a comic company with a huge roster of characters. And it was just kind of funny because when I mentioned to him that I was trying to be a writer, because it was kind of funny because they said, oh yeah, I'm a writer. He's like, I'm so sorry. That's really what he said to me, and it was funny. He's a nice guy. He's a cool guy. And yeah, as you can see, I keep it in a Ziploc bag in order to keep it safe, to make sure it doesn't get damaged. X-Men number 389. It's definitely an old comic because it still has the Comics Code Authority logo on it, so yeah, that's what I'm holding right here. Go back to your normal end screen. I said go back!